Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Naruto died at age 10? And a legendary future Naruto took over his body? Part 4. Many of the gathered spectators found themselves rooted to their seats in stark terror. Even some amongst the genin were having a hard time keeping their composure under the thickening clog of bloodlust slowly choking them. Genma took a step forward, intending to intervene before things got too out of hand, but a gentle yet unyielding hand arrested his movement. He followed the arm back to its owner and had to fight down the shudder that threatened to crawl up his spine. Staring back at him were cool, clear, and focused azure eyes which pierced him to his very core. Yondaime-sama, he couldn't help but think, having been on the man's personal guard, he had found himself under just such a gaze more than once. Naruto's calm tone broke him out of his reverie. It is fine, I can handle him. Blinking at that, Genma found himself unable to doubt the teen, yet he would still follow protocol. He turned a questioning gaze up to his Hokage, waiting for his direction on how to proceed. Sarutobi easily ignored the amount of killing intent saturating the air around him. His gaze instead focused on the blonde-haired genin currently looking back at him. In that blue gaze, he read a request not to interfere, a request for him to believe in Naruto. With a slight incline of his head, he leaned back in his seat, waiting to see how his successor's son would handle the situation. The previously tense Konoha ninja in the stadium took their cues from their wizened leader and relaxed, not fully, but enough not to be on high alert. By this time, the explosion of chakra had subsided enough for everyone to see Gaara's figure. Stifled screams of fright erupted from various mouths among the stands as they all beheld Gaara's monstrous new form. Covered from head to toe in sand, Gaara perfectly resembled, in miniature, the very beast that he contained within him. His tail, made entirely of sand, waved lazily in the air behind him. His eyes contained a greater amount of madness than they had before, yet in them, Naruto saw something that managed to surprise him. Gaara was still in control. It seemed like this incarnation of Gaara was one of the rare ones who had full control of their tenant's chakra. Of course, being only one tail worth of demonic chakra, it was made somewhat easier to control. Naruto's acute hearing suddenly picked up nearly silent laughter coming from Gaara. It slowly rose in volume until the entire stadium was ringing with sheer insanity-made sound. Gaara howled like a mad animal, nothing but seething bloodlust in his voice. At this point, even the chunin among the audience had paled in rising terror. Finally, Gaara's malevolent chakra stabilized, and when Ninja took a measure of it, then the junin amongst them lost their color as well. It was cage level, times 3. Gaara took a step forward and silence descended like a curtain across the entire stadium, most of it brought on by fear of what was to come. He took another, then another, then another after that. Each successive step was taken faster than the last, until he was hurtling across the ground, moving at high speeds, only to suddenly launch his sand-encased right arm at Naruto's head when he was within striking distance. Naruto smoothly slid out of the way of the attack, and the other lumbering ones that came after it, his greater speed making it a trivial issue to evade the blows. He then saw an opening and, without wasting any time, he viciously exploited it. His right leg rocketed into Gaara's stomach, and stopped there. A terror-inducing grin split across Gaara's face as he just about sang, "Fuden, Datapa wind release, great blast." He took in a deep breath and, just before expelling the powerful attack, he noticed a pale blue flicker of light run down the leg lodged in his stomach. Forcefully spitting out the powerful jutsu in Naruto's face, he was launched backwards as the lightning clone detonated from the lethal assault, causing painful electrical shocks to his system. Gaara was back on his feet in a flash, casting his gaze across the stadium, looking for his elusive prey when his head suddenly whipped to the right under the force of Naruto's roundhouse kick. Before he could recover from that, he felt another vicious kick connect with his head, propelling him towards the wall of the stadium. He never made it. With a ground-shaking boom, a cloud of dust was kicked up, obscuring the two combatants from view. When it cleared, someone whistled as the scene revealed Naruto standing on Gaara's head, having obviously just stomped on him, both located within a respectably sized crater. Naruto leapt off of Gaara's prone figure and landed at the mouth of the hole in the ground. Slowly, Gaara got back to his feet with sand rising from the ground to patch up whatever damages he had sustained so far. The spectators roared in approval at the action-packed match, many of them forgetting the fear that had previously gripped them. Gaara slowly spun to lock eyes with Naruto's stationary figure. He opened his mouth and the voice that issued out of it had the undertones of things that go bump in the night. Uzumaki Naruto, mother will have your blood. With that simple statement, he slammed his fists into the ground at his feet. It began slowly. Eventually, even the civilians picked up on the rumbling sound of moving earth, and before any of them could ask what the cause of the sound was, it revealed itself. Half of the entire battlefield exploded upwards into a mind-blowing towering wave of sand. It climbed higher and higher until its very shadow extended beyond the stands, casting them into partial darkness. Eyes widened in disbelieving horror. Most of the people watching pushed back in their seats, as far as they could go, all to get away from the terror-inducing sight before them. Through all the panic permeating the air, Naruto evenly looked back at Gaara, his unbothered gaze aggravating the mad Jinchuriki even more. With a bloodthirsty roar, Gaara flung his arms forward and the dance began. Right off the bat, Naruto noticed that the sands were moving significantly faster than they previously had. In fact, they seemed to be moving faster than his raw speed at his level. Not yet willing to remove one level of his custom limiter, he pushed his body to the limit, utilizing all that his long life had taught him to dodge and weave through the perilous arms of sand. Gaara, having long since emerged from the hole in the ground, watched with an ever-widening grin on his face as his opponent was hard-pressed to survive his onslaught. He abruptly forced more chakra into the sand he was controlling, and then with a burst of speed, one of the arms racing towards Naruto surged forward, faster than before. To Gaara, and some of the people watching, it seemed as though the world had stopped. Naruto had sensed the approaching sand and moved his head out of the way of the suddenly faster tendril, but he was not fast enough. A thin line of blood appeared on his left cheek, the sand having effortlessly sliced through his face mask to get to the skin beneath it. In the stands, Sakura, and even Kakashi, leaned forward in the disbelief. In the arena, Gaara's pupils dilated so wide that his eyes were now completely gold-colored. Before anyone could react to the new development, his chakra spiked powerfully as Shukaku's own bloodlust joined with and heightened his own, at the sight of bleeding prey. With the spectators watching on, the sand surged forward, too fast. Naruto wove, curled, jumped and twisted as hard as he could, but even he knew that at his level, he was only delaying the inevitable. He pulled out maneuvers that he had learned as a taijutsu master in his past lives. He even resorted to jumping off nearby strands of sand, to escape certain death. It wasn't enough. He knew that he was going to get caught, and when it did finally happen, to those who cared for the blonde-haired genin, it was like watching a train wreck. Naruto jumped back to avoid sand that had suddenly dove towards him. He landed and prepared to leap again, when he noticed Gaara's triumphant grin. He immediately cast his senses out and his eyes widened when he realized the trap that he had just landed in. He forced chakra to his legs in preparation for an evasive maneuver, but it was already too late. The sand at his feet, filled with Gaara's chakra, suddenly shifted. For an instant, Naruto was off balance. It was long enough. Naruto's legs were suddenly encased in sand to hold him in place and, before he could react, more sand lurched forward to cover his entire body. Some of the spectators screamed in fright at the new development, worried about the fate of their favorite participant. Kakashi paled and tensed, unconsciously taking a step forward in rising trepidation. Sarutobi's grip on his pipe became punishing as the lines in his face became fixed. Orochimaru leaned forward in anticipation, eager to see how the enterprising blonde-haired genin would get out of his predicament. Without wasting any time, Gaara howled out his glee. Die. Then before the horrified gaze of the Konoha shinobi, the sand imploded, and all was silent. Kakashi, hoping that his student had pulled off another spectacular move, frantically cast his gaze around the stadium, looking for a sign. However, he slumped in sorrow when his sharp eye caught bits of red visible in interspaced spots around the cocoon of sand. As Gaara opened his mouth to celebrate his final victory, an object suddenly crashed into the ground behind him. Eyes wide in hesitant denial, he slowly turned his body to the rapidly clearing cloud of dust. The dust eventually dispersed to reveal Naruto's bare-chested kneeling figure. He had one hand fisted on the ground, and his hair, freed from the obstruction of his headband, hung low into his eyes. Kakashi's gaze cut back to the remnants of the sand cocoon and he sighed in relief when he noticed that the red was in fact caused by the tattered pieces of Naruto's red muscle shirt. Many of the spectators observed him, wide-eyed, with a few blushes here and there. The ninja in particular noted his flawless skin, not understanding how someone in his profession could have no scars whatsoever. With a start, most of the Konoha spectators realized that this was the first time in over 2 years that any of them would be seeing his face. Many of them had long since forgotten just what he looked like, and more than a few were eager to see what was beneath his face mask. With smooth and graceful movements, Naruto got back to his feet, and when he raised his head to face Gaara, and coincidentally, the stands as well, numerous jaws dropped in shock. Standing there, ocean blue eyes calm and focused, blonde hair freed from restraint, and with a smooth and handsome unscarred face, Naruto cut a truly awe-inspiring figure. His resemblance to his father had never before been as obvious as it was at that moment. Indeed, many watching immediately noticed the hair-raising similarities between the genin standing before them and the late Yondaime Hokage. And with that thought, dangerous realizations began to take root in many a mind. Paying no attention to the sudden outbreak of muttering amongst the spectators, he let loose a near-silent sigh. He absently raised his eyes to the skies when he noticed a shadow passing over the sun. He took in the gathering clouds, and recalled that it usually rained at this time. Excellent, he thought to himself. He dropped his head, his piercing gaze focused on Gaara, and his calm, even tone effortlessly cut through the noise in the stadium, capturing the attention of everyone present. You know, Gaara, I am somewhat glad that you are my opponent. That statement confused many of the watchers, Gaara included. While they were trying to understand what he meant, Naruto unobtrusively released one level of his limiter seal while simultaneously clamping down on his chakra to prevent anyone from noticing its sudden increase. He fought not to react to the sudden rush of power filling his veins as more of his chakra suddenly became accessible to him. At this new level, his speed was cage level, as was his strength as well. His eyes refocused on Gaara's slightly confused ones, and he explained his somewhat vague statement, while slowly molding a relatively small portion of his now vast reserves of chakra. Of all the genin participants, besides me, you are the most durable, and therefore the most likely one to survive a full assault from me. Gaara gained a perplexed look on his face, unable to understand why Naruto had just said what he did. Before people could express their own disbelief at the sudden knowledge that Naruto had been holding back, they noticed a sudden disturbance in the air around Naruto's form. All confusion fled from Gaara's face, and the faces of those in the stands, when he noticed how the sand at Naruto's feet was swirling. Immediately, he cast his senses out and stumbled back in rising fear. Up in the stands, the higher-ranked ninja found themselves flabbergasted at the amount of chakra Naruto still had. Many of the older Konoha shinobi wondered if all the chakra they had felt him using so far was his alone, before dismissing the thought as ludicrous. There was no way they would have missed the feeling of Kyuubi's chakra if he was indeed using it. The civilians, who were unable to sense Naruto's chakra output, wondered at the hesitation being shown by the sand-covered killer. They all received their answer when the air around Naruto suddenly exploded in a massive blazing blue corona of energy. Gaara flinched in shock when Naruto's powerful blue chakra became visible around him, noticing that the eruption of chakra had even dented the ground at the blonde genin's feet. It began slowly, but eventually, even the civilians watching picked up on the hum of electricity in the air as Naruto's chakra gradually turned lightning-natured. The spectators all leaned forward in anticipation of whatever the remarkable young genin would do next. Nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. Naruto's eyes locked on Gaara's black and gold ones, and the Suna Jinchuriki noticed that his eyes seemed to be giving off little forks of lightning from time to time. And then, all other thoughts, save a paralyzing fear, fled his mind when Naruto's voice cut through the air. Raiden. Shunko lightning release. Flash cry. For a moment, everything was frozen. The crowds were silent, the air was still, Gaara was frozen in place, and Naruto was motionless. Then without warning, the very air tore with a piercing cry as the region around Naruto's form detonated with a surge of supercharged lightning chakra. Through the furious storm of chakra, the gathered people could barely make out what was happening as lightning was gathered at specific parts of Naruto's figure, his hands, feet, and at his upper back. When the explosion of chakra finally died down, they beheld Naruto's new form. He stood before them, form wreathed in flickering and crackling blue-white power. He looked as though he were suited with boots and gauntlets made of condensed lightning. The lightning congregated at his limbs constantly gave off sparks and bolts that effortlessly tore up the ground around him. Across the stadium, ocular dujutsu were activated as members of the Hyuga family tried to understand the effect of the new jutsu. Amongst the Konoha Junin, a gasp drew the attention of the ninja present to one of their number, a Hyuga Junin who had his Byakugan active. Without prompting, he began to describe what his eyes were telling him, causing those within earshot to lean forward in interest, which slowly turned to astonishment. Amazing! This is unbelievable. His chakra is not just coating his limbs, but it is actually affecting his internal organs as well. Indeed, the lightning seems to be stimulating his nervous system as a whole, augmenting it and allowing it perform at unbelievable levels. I can only assume that his reflexes would have been increased tenfold. Also, the muscles in his limbs are being affected as well and enhanced drastically, leading me to conclude that his speed and strength are being raised to phenomenal levels. All in all, it is most likely a body enhancement jutsu much like the Yondaime Reikage's Raiden no Yoroi, lightning release armor. When he finished, he looked around to find the disbelieving faces of his comrades. Many of the civilians who had been within hearing range were also in awe of the jutsu they were witnessing. Before more could be said on the matter, Naruto attacked. Having already been above cage level at level 6, the use of the body enhancement jutsu put him beyond the reach of every ninja present in the stadium, with speed that rivaled the Yondaime Reikage when using his lightning armor. The entire stadium was still gaping at the scene before them, when a sharp cry of pain caused everyone to quickly focus on Gaara. Eyes narrowed in confusion as they noticed that Gaara's stocky form was hunched over in obvious pain, with no visible cause before them. Without any prior warning, lightning suddenly erupted from Gaara's back, blasting off to tear a clean hole through the wall behind him. Breath locked in his throat from the mind-numbing pain of having a powerful bolt of lightning pass clean through him as well as from the mighty impact to his stomach, Gaara's back arched, his head thrown backwards, and mouth open to scream, just before he was abruptly blasted away with a boom of sound as he received a punishing roundhouse kick to his face. His rapid flight was painfully halted by an unrelenting elbow to his back, before he was forcibly returned the way he came by a follow-up punch. The gathered watchers swiveled their heads in confusion, trying in vain to catch sight of the person that was attacking Gaara, Naruto still stood in his spot, gazing forward impassively. As Gaara crashed into the wall on the far side of the stadium, the spectators finally noticed as Naruto's form wavered and finally disappeared. Afterimage. They expressed their approval in a cheer so loud, the ground seemed to shake with their voice. Unbelievable. The stuttered cry of Konoha's famed beast drew the attention of the people near him, before they followed his gaze to find Naruto standing at Gaara's last position, his hand still outstretched after delivering his bone-jarring punch. As Guy continued to speak, the people near him refocused on his words. I couldn't even see him move. Before the full implications of his statement could set in, he turned to his left to cast a questioning gaze at his silver-haired eternal rival. With a shake of his head, Kakashi replied. I could just barely keep up, and even then. Astonished silence descended on the gathered Junin when Kakashi turned to face them, revealing that he had uncovered his Sharingan eye, and still only just barely managed to follow Naruto's movements. The Konoha ninjas present were furiously racking their brains for any memory that hinted at Naruto's sudden skill. At this time, they were far beyond the point of brushing it off as the power of his tenant. None of them could fathom how such an obviously powerful genin had flown under the radar for so long. The foreign ninja amongst them were feeling the faint stirrings of unease in the pits of their stomachs as they beheld the finely controlled power behind one of Konoha's new blood. Any of them who had been entertaining thoughts of Konoha's fall from being the top of the food chain promptly squashed said thoughts. If that was what a genin could do, what about the Junin? What about the Hokage? The Konoha genin, on the other hand, were struggling with the sudden onset of feelings of inadequacy. There, before their very eyes, was a genin that most of them had dismissed as a poor excuse for a ninja. None of them could understand how they had never noticed any improvement in Naruto over the years that they had known him. None of them had any warning to prepare them for their suddenly too powerful age mate. Sarutobi relaxed back in his chair, and set about refilling his pipe. He shook his head as he marveled at the amazing skill being shown by his successor's legacy. However, he let loose a slightly weary sigh as he was forced to acknowledge that Jiraiya had been right when he warned him that Naruto wasn't being fully open with them when they last spoke in his office. Still, he thought to himself, for all that he has been through, the young lad is due his own secrets. Orochimaru had to force down the shudders of near ecstasy that threatened to rack his body. He was however unable to stifle the reflexive urge to lick his lips as he trained his gaze on the glowing form of Uzumaki Naruto. His mind had been made up from the moment he saw Namikaze's brat utilize the Hyuga defensive jutsu. He would have the genin for study. The display before him just roused his enthusiasm to greater heights. Still, he mastered his rising anticipation. It was not yet time to act. The attention of the spectators was dragged back to the rapidly escalating match as they heard the pained grunting of Gaara. Gaara finally managed to peel himself off of the wall and he swayed on his feet as Shukaku's Yuki worked furiously to heal the damage he had just sustained. Once he felt his injuries vanish, he turned his baleful gaze onto his enemy. Gritting his teeth at the calm and unbothered look directed back at him, he furiously flung his arms out at Naruto. Mind-boggling amounts of sand surged forward once more at Gaara's gesture, suddenly bearing down on Naruto's position. With a small and amused smile, Naruto vanished from where he was standing. Without warning, save for Naruto's sudden absence, Gaara was booted forward by a kick to his back. He landed in the middle of the battlefield, and quickly got back to his feet, his thick sand-coated arms already weaving through the air as he directed numerous strands of sand, trying to capture Naruto. Naruto, with the same smile on his face, flickered from place to place in the stadium, each time materializing only long enough for Gaara to catch a glimpse of his form and react to it. Left, right, behind, and in front, Gaara directed his sand all over the place, trying in vain to finally catch and kill his opponent, all the while unaware that he was being maneuvered into a trap. Suddenly, Naruto vanished but did not appear in Gaara's field of vision again. Snapping his head left and right, Gaara frantically tried to locate his opponent before he struck again. It was then that his hearing picked up the mutterings of the crowd. Turning to the stands, he noticed that everyone was pointing upwards. With great reluctance, and no small amount of fear, he looked up to find, suspended in the air above him, what looked to be a large ceiling script made out of lightning. Sensing a presence before him, he dropped his gaze to find Naruto standing in front of him, out of reach of his sand. Slowly, Naruto's right arm came up to point at the writing in the air. With a sizzle and zap, the lightning shrouding his limbs suddenly congregated at his fingertip and then leapt, in the form of a powerful bolt, towards the ceiling script, which then began to grow brighter and brighter. Gaara, seeing that Naruto's body enhancement jutsu had been cancelled, was about to send sand to crush him, when some instinct made him look back up at the script in the air. If he could have paled, he would have. The script was now giving off little sparks of lightning, as though it were a time bomb. With a flash of cold fear down his spine, he abruptly remembered Naruto's fight with Neji and the seemingly harmless lighting bird. Furiously he reached for the numerous strands of sand around the battlefield, and that was when he realized what Naruto's real intentions had been. While Gaara had been sending his sand out to capture the ever-elusive Naruto, the ground around him had been gradually stripped bare of its covering of sand. At the end of it all, the effect was that from a bird's eye view, it would look like Gaara was standing in a circle of bare ground about 10 feet in diameter, while all around him at the edge of the circle, long strands of sand were rooted to the ground, waving in the air. The result was that while the sand provided an almost impregnable defense from a frontal attack, like a flower in bloom, it was easily susceptible to attacks from above. Now, as Gaara tried to get the sand to return from where it was, he knew that the sand was too far away, and that he would be too slow. Indeed, for while his sand was still feet away, Naruto spoke in a soft voice that was easily heard in the stadium. Raiden. Kami no Sabaki, lightning release, judgment of God. And with a roar of blinding white light, Gaara knew pain. To the spectators present, it was like the world had just come to an end. The entirety of the world perceived by their senses reduced to pure white nothingness, unable to see because of the blindingly bright explosion of light, and unable to hear because of the ringing silence brought on by the boom of sound beyond human hearing. For the Hyugas with their ocular dujutsu as well as the Inuzukas with their sensitive hearing, it was far worse. Eventually, their sights cleared, and the ringing petered out into true silence, allowing them to behold the magnificent and awe-inspiring devastation left behind by Naruto's attack. At first glance, it was immediately obvious that Gaara had somehow survived the massive attack, though he was obviously in no shape to continue. The glass sphere at Ground Zero was proof of Shukaku's successful efforts to keep his host alive. When it had become evident that the sand in the field was too dispersed for Gaara to gather it in time, the sand encasing his body had gathered itself into a defensive sphere moments before the attack had struck. By pumping all the Yuki he had into the sand sphere, Shukaku was able to keep Gaara alive through the heavy nigh-apocalyptic assault. The lightning attack had however managed to smelt the sand sphere as well as the ground around it into glass, causing some burns to Gaara's already injured body. Abruptly, with the sound of tinkling bells, the sphere shattered to deposit Gaara's barely conscious and panting form onto the floor. The entire stadium was completely silent, save for the short breaths of the defeated red-haired genin, everyone trying to take in the shocking end to the match. Gaara was only able to crawl a few inches before his strength finally failed him, and for the first time in his life, he passed out into full unconsciousness. Temari and Kankuro were speechless as they watched their brother pass out. It had never occurred to them, in all the years that they had known him, that he could ever be defeated. It was an unspoken understanding in Suna that the only ninja able to handle Gaara was the Yondaime Kazekage, owing to his use of Sakin no Jutsu, gold dust technique. To see him now, brought low by a mere genin, baffled their minds. The spectators were completely entertained by such a stunning conclusion to a spectacular match. To the potential clients in particular, it was a show like no other. Surely, they thought, if one of the little ones can call down lightning from the sky, Konoha must indeed be the mightiest of shinobi villages. Amongst the foreign shinobi, all lingering thoughts of post-Kyuubi weakness were completely dispelled in the wake of Naruto's performance. Sarutobi looked on with pride as the stands finally erupted in cheers and applause when Genma officially declared Naruto the winner. It warmed his heart to know that the future of Konoha rested in such dependable hands. Oh Minato, if only you could see your boy now, you would be so proud. Orochimaru gazed at the figure of Uzumaki, no, Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, and he was intrigued. At the start of the match he had focused on the blonde-haired child because he seemed to be a riddle, and ever the scientist, Orochimaru had wanted to figure him out. Who was this genin that would dare to stand against Orochimaru the snake charmer, and live to tell the tale? He had wanted to see just how much of the Yondaime's genius had bred true, and he was not disappointed. Yet, now that his haze of distracting glee had passed, he allowed himself to recognize the danger that such a powerful young genin posed to him, especially if he was this powerful at such a young age. Despite his desire to see what heights the child could attain, he knew that if he couldn't have him, then no one must be allowed to either. The pride shining in Kakashi's lone eye, his Sharingan having been hastily covered up when Naruto's last attack had been launched, was unmistakable. It was somewhat subdued by the knowledge that he had not played major part in the growth of his sensei's son, but he consoled himself with the promise to do better in the future. Still, despite his misgivings and feelings of failure, he was proud of his student, and pseudo-little brother, and he knew that his sensei would have been as well. The members of the Konoha population present in the stadium found their long-held beliefs under heavy attack. The child that they had long since tried to put down had grown and flourished into a phenomenal ninja, a legend in the making. Their feelings of shame and regret were further worsened by the chilling resemblance the boy bore to their much-beloved deceased Yondaime Hokage. The knowledge of that resemblance, in addition to the blazing speed that the young genin had just displayed, caused many of them to find themselves beginning to draw conclusions about the child's heritage. Still, even without the possibility of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki being the Hokage's son, the enthusiastic cheering of the foreigners around them told them quite clearly that they had misjudged the genin, and that in doing so, they had betrayed the ideal that Senju Hashirama had fought to create, the very will of fire that Namikaze Minato had given his life for. Naruto calmly observed the cheering crowd before him, listening to their shouted praises, and in some cases, marriage proposals. Smothering a huff of amused laughter at that last bit, his senses suddenly warned him of an approaching chakra signature, causing him to turn his gaze to the space in front of Gaara's prone figure, just in time for Temari and Kankuro to materialize out of their shunshin. The two Suna genin promptly froze when they noticed the cool scrutiny of the blonde-haired Konoha genin, completely afraid to make a move lest he decide to harm them. Without taking his eyes off the two, Naruto probed the chakra available to him at level 6. He had to fight back a pleased smile when he realized he still had the equivalent of the Sanbi's chakra capacity left. His absolute mastery over the lightning element ensured that his jutsu used the least amount of chakra necessary for the maximum amount of damage. Also, the fact that the levels of the seal were not linear in power, but roughly exponential, meant that he probably wouldn't have to release another level to deal with the coming invasion. It was just as he reached that conclusion that the enemies struck. Naruto didn't even flinch when the cage's box exploded in a cloud of smoke, knowing from past lives that the Sandaime Hokage could handle Orochimaru and his bag of tricks for at least half an hour before he would need backup. His attention was instead focused on the rapidly approaching hail of pointy death launched by the multitude of invading ninja who wanted to snuff out what was obviously Konoha's greatest potential. Noticing that the majority of the Konoha ninja were tied up fending off the invaders, Naruto did not bother waiting for help. As he turned to handle the attack headed his way, he saw that Konoha Junins had finally noticed the numerous kunai and shuriken bearing down on him, but were unable to move to help him. As the projectiles got closer, Naruto merely raised his two hands to them and intoned Jiden. Tengoku no Sekiryoku, magnetic release, heavenly repulsion. Heads turned to his direction in slight interest when they heard him speak, and then jaws summarily dropped as their owners registered their rapidly returning projectiles, all unerringly aimed at only invading shinobi. The faster ninja amongst them were able to dodge, but a handful of them were still either injured or killed by the reflected assault. Before the ninja could adjust to Naruto's baffling act, he went and pulled another one. Bringing up a single-handed ram seal, while also unsealing his ninjutsu from a previously invisible tattoo on his arm, he molded half of the chakra he currently possessed and then clearly stated. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, multiple shadow clone technique. Across the grounds, some enemy ninjas paled in disbelieving horror as 200 solid replicas of the shirtless genin materialized without sound or smoke in the center of the stadium, all armed with the same sword. Naruto gave a satisfied nod when his senses revealed that each of the clones had high Junin level reserves. As if the sudden arrival of backup was not enough, the clones formed a hand seal in eerie synchronization and spoke with one voice. Shunko, flash cry. A third of the invading forces present in the stadium died in the first few seconds before the light given off by the jutsu had faded. Of those that were left, all the Chunin perished in the next 10 seconds, while only 30 clones were forcefully dispersed, and all by Junins as they slew the Chunins around them. Now, of the 600 enemy ninja present in the stands, only about 150 remained. Some of the more cowardly ninja surrendered once they saw the rapid decrease in their numbers, and they were knocked out and taken away to a makeshift prison in the meantime. The others were ruthlessly cut down by the relatively more numerous Konoha ninja amongst them. All in all, it had taken under 10 minutes from start to finish for the stadium to be brought under control, with only a handful of Konoha ninjas dead, 3 minutes after Naruto's clones had joined the fray. The fighting done for now, the ninjas turned to watch as the numerous blondes all turned in unison to face the original, who was still standing in the center of the stadium. To those watching, it seemed as though Naruto merely nodded at his clones before they all suddenly took off into the rest of the village, no doubt to help fight off the intruders there. However, he had actually transmitted instructions to them to go and handle the rest of the intruders, focusing their efforts on the academy, the shelters and the hospital. In the confusion brought on by the sudden attack, Temari and Kankuro had taken the chance to collect Gaara and flee the stadium, heading into the forest via a hole that Naruto had put in the wall. They had not gone unnoticed, however, as Kabuto, in his disguise as a Konoha Anbu, had followed them, intending to see to the Suna Jinchuriki in order for him to be able to play his part in the invasion. With a foreboding smirk on his face, he realized that he would probably have to inject his master's trial drug into him to stimulate the regeneration of his tenant's chakra. Kakashi, seeing that the enemies in the vicinity had been subdued, turned to the genin near him to give them their orders for the defense of Konoha. After he had sent off the members of the Rookie 9 present, he turned to call Naruto over, just in time to watch him vanish from the stadium, heading to who knows where. With an exasperated sigh, he turned his focus to the huge barrier separating the Hokage and Orochimaru from the others, and went to see what he could do. Ibiki sighed in frustration as another batch of Konoha ninja were casually wiped out by the humongous snake summons brought by the invading Suna and Oto ninjas. The 5 snakes, including the 3-headed one, had long since smashed huge holes in Konoha's towering walls. The only thing keeping them outside was the constant onslaught of Konoha shinobi fighting to stall them. Still, at the rate things were going, Ibiki knew that they would have to pull back and allow the summons, as well as the ninja who summoned them, to fully breach the walls. Before he could deliver the order for a tactical retreat, a shouted cry heralded the arrival of the Toad Sannin. Kuchiyos, Yutai Kuzushi no Jutsu, summoning, food cart destroyer technique. With a might cloud of smoke, one of the 5 huge snakes was ruthlessly crushed by an equally large toad armed with twin swords. Standing on the head of the toad, white hair fluttering in the wind, Jiraiya gazed down on the ninja who were now staring at him in awe and gratitude. With a smile on his face, he was about to commence his usual introductory dance routine, when with a flash of light and boom of thunder, his godson was suddenly standing beside him. Many of the gathered ninja flinched in shock at the sudden appearance of the genin, and most of them couldn't help but liken his arrival to that of the Yondaime Hokage. The similarity was further enhanced by the fact that Naruto had finally gotten some clothes to wear, a white cloak with lightning bolts at the bottom worn over a blue muscle shirt, with his headband back around his forehead. Turning to his godfather, Naruto spoke while the ninja were still adjusting to his sudden presence. The old man needs your help. Orochimaru has trapped him in a barrier in the stadium and the Konoha ninjas can't get in. I can take over from you here. Giving his godson an assessing look, Jiraiya, to the consternation of the Konoha ninja who had been waiting for him, gave Naruto a nod and turned to leap towards the stadium. Just as the invading ninjas were beginning to smirk at the Toad Sannin's departure, Naruto jumped towards them, and while still in the air, he bit his thumb, blurred through 3 hand seals, and slapped his hands down in midair. Kuchiyos no Jutsu, summoning technique. The cloud of smoke that was formed covered everything in the vicinity, making the people present unable to see. When it finally cleared, the enemy ninja could do not but blink at what they saw. Naruto stood on the head of the toad, which a few Konoha junins identified as the master swordsman of the Toad clan, Gamahiro, while around him were Gamaken and 2 other equally huge toads. While the ninja were taking in the arrivals of the toads, a buzz of sound heralded the sudden arrival of 10 of Naruto's clones, all clad in lightning and all wielding a sword crackling with lightning chakra. The standoff between the 2 factions was abruptly broken when Naruto appeared in front of the Junin leading the invading forces present, ninjutsu already pierced through his heart, and a cold look in his blue eyes. The Konoha ninjas, bolstered by the presence of the summons and the obvious skill of the blonde-haired genin, as evidenced by Jiraiya's faith in him, surged forward with a unified war cry. For the will of fire! Iruka's hand trembled almost unnoticeably as he watched some of his remaining fellow academy instructors struggle to maintain the earth wall that was keeping the enemy ninjas out of the academy. Once the invasion had started, the academy instructors had gathered as many young children as they could and, just as they had practiced, they all fled towards the academy, intending to use the secret passage there to take them to the shelters. However, they had gotten waylaid by dozens of enemy ninjas, and in the struggle, only about half of the academy instructors had survived to get everyone inside the academy and safe for the moment. Iruka knew that the enemies were just toying with them since they hadn't even tried to break through the windows that were undefended in the room they were holed up in. The Konoha people present were able to watch as most of the gathered invaders lounged around while, from time to time, one of them would launch an attack at the earth wall defending the place. It was a bad situation because keeping up the wall drained chakra regardless of if it was under assault or not, and the Konoha ninjas didn't dare take it down even if no one was attacking it, since they couldn't guarantee that they could bring it back up fast enough. Some of the children whimpered as one of the 3 chunin holding the walls slumped over in chakra exhaustion, the other 2, now fronting more of the chakra cost, wouldn't last much longer. The 50 or so invaders outside, sensing weakness, slowly began to congregate at the entrance, waiting for the wall to finally fall. Inside the room, the teachers and children watched them approach, when suddenly, with a flash of light and a boom of rolling thunder, there were 3 blonde-haired shirtless figures kneeling in the midst of the enemies. Iruka only had time to question Naruto before the 3 copies of his favorite student were in motion, swinging their lightning-charged ninjutsus and scything down the invaders. The enemies, expecting little resistance at the academy, had sent only genin with a handful of chunin. Against foes that were junin level before using a body enhancement jutsu, they were dead in seconds. The children broke out in cheers when they noticed that all the enemies had been taken down, too relieved to actually care about the dead bodies before their eyes. The chunins finally let down the earth wall and collapsed in exhaustion. The three clones entered the academy while deactivating their lightning jutsu, and immediately moved to attend to the injured ninja amongst them, their hands glowing green with the Shaozen no Jutsu, mystical palm technique. Around them, children cheered, and Iruka smiled in relief and pride at the blonde-haired ninjas before him. Back at the stadium, the three Naruto clones still present arrived at the barrier on the roof just in time to hear Jiraiya curse. Damn it! The only way in is to disable the barrier with a counter seal, and that will take too long to make. The smirking form of Tayuya, one of Orochimaru's elite sound ninja, taunted the Konoha shinobi gathered around the huge barrier, unable to do anything from outside, while inside, their Hokage battled against three cages. Jiraiya gritted his teeth as he began to take out sealing supplies to get started on the counter seal, when he noticed three of his godson's clones standing there. The Anbu around him followed his gaze when they sensed the three newcomers and wondered what they were doing there. The clone in the lead exchanged looks with the other two and, with a unified nod, the two beside him each placed one of their hands on him while also forming a ram seal with the other. The hands placed on the lead clone's shoulders began to glow blue, and before any of those present could react, the other two clones transferred all of their remaining chakra to him and smoothly faded out of existence. Now armed with slightly more chakra than he was created with, the lone clone stepped forward to face Tayuya, who couldn't help but spit out. "And just what the do you think you're going to do, huh, shitface?" In response, the clone slowly wove 5 hand seals, and with a chilling finality, he solemnly intoned. Raiden Kinjutsu. Oni no Kugutsu, lightning release forbidden technique, demonic puppetry. Tayuya screamed as the clone abruptly hijacked the electrical impulses running along her nervous system, forcibly ripping control of her body from her brain. The ninjas present watched on in something like horror as, against her will, Tayuya's hands separated from the seal they were holding, causing the barrier jutsu to fail. With a flicker and huge surge of chakra, the barrier imploded on itself owing to the sudden imbalance of chakra input. The feedback forced chakra into all 4 Oto Nin connected to it, instantly killing 3 of them while permanently removing Tayuya's ability to use chakra and knocking her unconscious. Quickly recovering from their slight surprise at Naruto's technique, the Anbu and Jiraiya prepared to leap to the Hokage's aid once the barrier fully vanished. They noticed that the clone was panting on the floor after releasing the technique, indicating that its chakra costs were massive. The clone watched with gritted teeth, as the barrier faded enough for him to see the Sandaime simultaneously engaging the Shadaime and Orochimaru, while the Nadaime snuck up on him. Noticing that the Hokage was getting tired, and had probably failed to sense the presence of his other teacher, the clone prepared the last of its chakra. Jiraiya's eyes widened as he noticed what the clone had just seen, and it was in that moment that the barrier finally vanished. Even as he was blurring across the distance between them, he knew that he would not make it time. Suddenly, the area around the Nadaime exploded as something slammed into him, allowing the Hokage to finally disengage from his 2 opponents and retreat to the arriving backup. The dust cleared to reveal the damaged body of the Nadaime, smashed into the ground by a lightning-encased clone holding in its down-thrust arm, a swirling ball of blue chakra. With a glance in the direction of the Konoha entourage, the clone finally dispelled, having used up all of its chakra in that last move. Determined not to waste the chance that Naruto had given him, the Sandaime Hokage straightened and gathered his chakra around him, suddenly appearing as the Kami no Shinobi of legends. The Toad Sannin stepped up to his right, while to his left, the Copy Ninja and the Green Beast of Konoha took their position, ready to face down their enemies. Before the battle could resume, Jiraiya unsealed a roll of sealing tags and with a nod to the Anbu captain present, tossed it at him. Knowing his teammates' love for forbidden jutsu, they had planned for just such an occasion. With an unspoken signal, the two sides clashed. The original Naruto coolly surveyed the smoking battleground before him. All the snake summons had been dealt with, and he was pleased to note that the toads had sustained minor injuries at worst. With a graceful and respectful bow towards the 5 toads, he allowed them to return to their home on Mount Mayuboku. During the course of the battle at the walls, he had been receiving periodic updates from all his clones scattered throughout the village. With the arrival of the Shunko using clones, the Konoha ninjas had been able to summarily defeat and subdue the invaders with minimal casualties. Now, all that were left were negligible pockets of resistance which wouldn't last much longer. With a mental command for his clones to begin tending to the wounded, Naruto vanished in what was rapidly becoming his signature, a flash of blue-white light and the rolling sound of thunder, leaving behind a group of Konoha ninja who would tell of his prowess in the days, weeks, months and years to come. Jiraiya panted next to his teacher as he gathered himself to re-engage with the Shadaime and Orochimaru. The Konoha ninja had caught a lucky break earlier on and, after many powerful exchanges, they had managed to seal up the Nadaime Hokage. With the odds improved in their favor, they had driven Orochimaru and his summoned puppet back, leaving Orochimaru just as run down as they were and damaging the Shadaime numerous times, forcing him to pause at various intervals to regenerate. At this point, Kakashi was barely standing, exhausted from the prolonged use of his Sharingan in such a high-level battle. Guy's muscles were strained to their limit as he fought to keep the Kaiman gate of view open. He had been forced to release 6 of the 8 celestial gates in order to keep up with the monstrous cage-level ninjas around him. Still, things were not going as well as they could be. The nigh invincibility imparted on the Shadaime by Orochimaru's technique meant that, whereas the Konoha ninja had managed to tire out Orochimaru and even damage the summoned puppet, Hashirama was still as fresh as a daisy, with unlimited chakra to call upon. If Hashirama were still merely human, the combined might of the Kami no Shinobi, the Toad Sage, the Copy Shinobi, and the Green Beast of Konoha would have been enough to put him down by now. However, every time they dealt what would have been a fatal blow, he just shrugged it off and healed himself. Add to that problem the fact that he couldn't run out of chakra like they could, and you get an untenable situation. The sound of palms meeting in a clap drew the attention of the Konoha ninja to find Hashirama about to launch another Mokudan attack at them. Sarutobi, knowing that the others could not keep up with such a stalemate for much longer, prepared to sacrifice himself to give them the opening they needed. However, the next events showed that Orochimaru was also tired of the stalemate and intended to bring the battle to a close. Hashirama's dead voice intoned, "Mokudan Haijutsu. Jukai Koden" would release secret technique, Nativity of a World of Trees. The ground between the two factions erupted in a mass of rapidly growing trees, all reaching forward to kill the Konoha ninja. Sarutobi and Jiraiya furiously harnessed their flagging chakra to pull off a combination fire jutsu, hoping that it would be enough to check the army-killing attack bearing down on them. They needn't have bothered. With a boom of sound, Naruto's voice suddenly roared through the air, originating from the space in between the Konoha contingent and the approaching trees. Raiden. Raryu no Koko, lightning release. Roar of the lightning dragon. Out of Naruto's mouth emerged a massive torrent of yellow crackling devastation. The attack rapidly expanded to match the size of the approaching trees, and when the two met, the explosion was felt throughout the entire village. While the ninjas were blinded by the light, the Anbu captain felt a body breeze past him, while plucking a sealing tag from his hand. The light and dust finally cleared to reveal splinters, sawdust, and, in some cases, ash. Orochimaru let loose an annoyed hiss and spun to command the Shadaime Hokage, only for his eyes to widen in surprise when he caught the sealing tag planted on the chest of the summoned cage by a fading blonde-haired clone. Before he could react, the seal activated and sealed up his puppet, permanently. The snake Sanin's infuriated gaze cut back to the Konoha ninjas to find the slightly hunched over and out-of-breath form of Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto. Having finally regained his breath after such an expenditure of chakra, enough to summon 4 Gamabuntas, Naruto straightened and faced Orochimaru, sensing, but not reacting to, the appearance of the Sandaime, Jiraiya, Kakashi and Guy at his side. No one stopped to ask what a genin was doing standing shoulder to shoulder with Konoha's most powerful ninja. Indeed, if one tilted their head and squinted, it would look like Namikaze Minato was the one standing in Naruto's place. Even Orochimaru had to acknowledge that he had lost the battle. With a frustrated glance at the captured figure of the only surviving one of his Oto elites, he vanished before the eyes of the gathered Konoha ninja, trailing away like dispersing smoke. For a moment, the stadium was silent as the ninjas present looked around in case Orochimaru was still lying in wait. With a bone-weary sigh, Sarutobi finally relaxed from his ready stance, causing the others to break out in smiles of relief, with even some vocalized cheers amongst them. The Sandaime's gnarled hand came to rest on Naruto's gold locks and he ruffled them with a fond and proud smile on his face. The surrounding ninja also aimed smiles of gratitude at the genin in their midst, still too relieved at surviving the ordeal to begin questioning just how they had survived. A few miles from the walls of Konoha, Kabuto stepped over the unconscious bodies of the 2 older Sand siblings, slowing approaching the prone form of the Ikibi Jinchuriki. With deft movements, his hands reached into a pocket to extract a syringe filled with viscous white liquid. With the smooth and steady hands of a veteran medic, he administered the cocktail to Gaara, and promptly hightailed it out of there, pausing to grab the 2 unconscious teenagers on his way, just on a whim. All across Konoha, eyes widened in terror as a thick miasma of madness-inducing bloodlust suddenly overlaid the village. Civilians crumbled to their knees, with some of them throwing up in sheer fear, while others passed out under the onslaught. Almost as one, ninjas turned to face the general direction from which the feeling was originating, and when they beheld the approaching behemoth, sheer pandemonium broke out. The Hokage, trailed by Jiraiya, Kakashi, Guy, Naruto, and the Anbu captain arrived at the wall upon which Ibiki stood, facing the slowly approaching form of the one-tailed desert raccoon, Shukaku. Jiraiya cursed when he realized that his chakra was too low to pull off summoning Gamabunta, and the hard look in his sensei's eyes told him he was almost out as well. He barely managed not to twitch when, with the buzzing of electricity, numerous blonde clones arrive around them. Counting them, he quickly estimated there to be about 20 clones present, all with their lightning jutsu deactivated. Naruto probed his chakra network and had to fight back a sigh when he realized that he only had about 20% of his chakra left, slightly not enough for what he intended to do. Determined not to release another level of his seal, he cast a considering glance at the clones around him and with a nod, he sent a mental command towards them. In unison, 20 hands came up to point towards the original Naruto, while the other 20 formed ram seals. Strands of blue chakra reached from the outstretched hands to connect with the original, and the more sensitive ninja were able to sense the transfer of chakra taking place. Naruto's clones had been fighting for a while and were nowhere near full capacity. Still, they were able to raise his chakra enough to be able to handle the massive working he was about to pull off. As the clones, finally devoid of all chakra, vanished from sight, Naruto turned back to the approaching Ikibi. He cast his gaze upwards and was gratified to note that the clouds had fully gathered and darkened sufficiently. It cost less chakra when he didn't have to set up the proper conditions for his intended jutsu. While the gathered ninja looked on, wondering what Naruto planned to do, he stepped forward to the edge of the wall, and began to mold all the chakra he had left, causing some people to flinch as his body suddenly exploded in a raging blue storm of chakra. Slowly, he bit his thumb and his hands came up to form hand seals. Bird. The skies above suddenly darkened further as Naruto's chakra reached out to begin affecting its surroundings, priming the air for the powerful jutsu about to be performed. Boar. Lightning began to leap from cloud to cloud as his chakra discharged, sparking off a cascade of electrical eruptions across the skies. Near constant rolling thunder boomed across the heavens as lightning lit up the darkened skies. At this point, eyes were locked on the darkened clouds as their owners felt their hair standing on end on account of the extremely charged air. Even Shukaku had paused in his approach to observe what was happening. Only Sarutobi, Jiraiya, and Kakashi were watching Naruto, and so, they were the only ones who noticed how much strain the technique was putting him under. Ram. Suddenly, the chakra surrounding Naruto leapt to the skies as single bolt of lightning, as though it were a signal flare. Then, Naruto spoke in a voice that echoed across the entire village and seemed to speak to the very heavens themselves. And the heavens spoke back. Raiden Kuchios. Raiju lightning summoning, thunder beast. The very skies trembled with a sudden roar of thunder, and the air exploded with a blinding flash of lightning. Naruto, completely drained of chakra, swayed on the spot and then slowly fell over backwards, into the waiting arms of the Sandaime Hokage. Before his eyes closed, he was able to catch a glimpse of the 300-foot-tall lightning wolf he had summoned bounding towards the figure of the one-tailed demon, and then he knew no more. Sarutobi let loose a weary sigh as he stood up from his seat beside the unconscious form of Uzumaki Naruto. It was time for the first council meeting since the events of the invasion and they had much to discuss. Even the daimyo would be in attendance, since the village had finally settled down and begun to recover from the devastating attack. The initial reports and estimates had revealed that Konoha had lost a surprisingly low number of defendants, less than a few hundred all told. Those same reports also listed the most likely cause for their low casualty rates, Uzumaki Naruto. Sarutobi knew that the next few hours would determine the young man's fate, and he could do nothing but pray that his perverted student got back in time with his target. He had played the doting sensei for too long, it was time he acted as the Hokage he was. With that last thought, he turned to leave the room, preparing himself as though he were going to war, a reasonable assumption. The council chamber was filled with the voices of those gathered. The civilians on one side were muttering amongst themselves about the happenings of the past few days, and about the genin that everyone was talking about. They were uneasy because the recent events of the invasion had revealed to those present that they had all been terribly wrong in their action towards the blonde-haired child. Many of them had been the more vocal detractors of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki and now, it seemed like their malicious actions would be returning to bite them. Seating away from their civilian counterparts, the ninja clan heads were also involved in a discussion of their own. Many of them had children in the same year as Uzumaki Naruto and had, in the past, inquired after the boy's nature and performance in the academy. The reports were not flattering. Yet, the events of the failed invasion and the Chunin selection exams suggested that everyone had been fooled by the genin's nonchalant airs. Though, as most of them recalled, Naruto had apparently broken all the records held in the academy graduation exam, so maybe, the signs had been there from the beginning, and they had simply missed them. Hyuga Hiyashi sat in his usual stoic manner, face blank and hiding the turbulent thoughts raging through his mind. After things had settled, he had attended a meeting with his clan elders, and they had made their opinions clear. They would not, could not, stand by while a no-name orphan made a mockery of their clan's most prized techniques. An opinion shared by most of the members of the clan, main branch and otherwise. Hiyashi had reserved his judgment, swayed by memories of another blonde-haired blue-eyed prodigy who had performed previously thought to be impossible feats with casual ease. A man who had been a dear friend to him and his wife. When the elders had thought to call him out on his neutral stance on the matter, he had simply pointed out that they had no grounds on which to persecute the genin. They didn't have proof that he had stolen their clan scrolls, nor did he possess the Sharingan to copy their technique. As impossible as it seemed, they just had to accept that he had simply observed the technique being performed, and replicated it, adapting it to suit his needs. After much grumbling and empty threats, they had subsided, leaving with a warning to keep an eye on the boy, and find out if he could be manipulated for the benefit of the clan. Hiyashi had merely gazed back coolly at the interfering old fossils until they shuffled off uneasily. Now, as he sat in wait for the arrival of the Hokage and the daimyo, he wondered what would happen next. Nara Shikaku sighed tiredly as his ears picked up some of the things the civilians were talking about. As Junin commander, he was expected to be aware of all the ninja in Konoha, in particular, all those with potential. Thus, it was perfectly understandable that he felt blindsided by Uzumaki Naruto's performance during the Chunin exams and the invasion after it. He recalled Shikamaru mentioning, about 2 years ago, that Naruto seemed to have changed after his 1-month-long absence from school. Yet, Shikamaru had said that there was nothing interesting about him. He just skipped school and generally acted as though he couldn't be bothered to try. Now, it became clear that his indifference had not been out of laziness, but simply because he really couldn't be bothered to try. Though it was troublesome, he acknowledged that the blonde-haired genin currently lying unconscious in the hospital presented a most intriguing puzzle to be solved, and there was almost nothing he liked more than solving puzzles. Inoichi flicked his gaze at Shikaku next to him, his sharp eyes easily picking up on the calculating gleam in his friend's eyes, his decades-long experience of the other man allowing him to correctly deduce the shape of his thoughts. He couldn't blame him. His darling Ino, ever the gossip queen that she was, had wasted no time in telling him all that had happened during their mission to the Land of Waves. Going so far as to give him necessary background information on Naruto in order to put things in perspective for him. Being a high-ranking member of the intelligence department, Inoichi was one of the few people privy to the truth behind Uzumaki's 3 months' absence from the public. Having long since mastered the art of psychological evaluation, he wondered if he could cite the boy's attempted suicide as the cause of his sudden change. Still, even if the experience caused him to take his studies more seriously, it still could not account for the boy's quite frankly terrifying skill in the ninja arts. Here, the highly classified report of his battle with Orochimaru in the forest came to mind. He could not quite fathom how no one had noticed such talent. Did the boy's status as a Jinchuriki blind the academy instructors to the prodigy in their midst? Or, was it, as Ino had said, that the boy simply didn't display anything to reveal his hidden talents? Either way, he concluded, something is going on and this meeting should help sort things out. All talking in the room abruptly ceased as the doors were pushed open, many in the room unconsciously straightening in their seats at the serious air surrounding the now present Sandaime Hokage and daimyo. The 2 most powerful men in the Land of Fire walked side by side to their seats located in between the 2 factions of the council. As soon as they were seated, Sarutobi motioned to a clerk who had been standing by the side to begin. With the nervous air of one new to the job, Hamada Hisui cleared his throat and began to speak, valiantly ignoring the focused gazes of all the people gathered in the room. As of 2 hours ago, these are the casualty reports. Damages sustained to numerous houses, businesses, the Shinobi Academy, the Chunin Exam Stadium, the village walls, and parts of the hospital total about 27 million ryo. The number of deaths reported so far is 298 ninjas, made up of 48 Junin, 75 Chunin, and the rest Genin. On the civilian side, we have a reported 134 deaths and many more injuries for both ninjas and civilians alike. With that last statement, he took a step back, clearly indicating that he was done. After he had finished, Sarutobi motioned for him to begin distributing the folders he had in his hand in which were contained a far more detailed accounting of the losses they had sustained. A few minutes of paper shuffling later, most of the councilmen present finally let loose the breaths that they had been holding, somewhat relieved that the losses sustained were relatively little for an invasion attempt by two powerful ninja villages. With the details laid out before them, Sarutobi opened up the floor for individuals to come forward with reports from the various sectors that they were in charge of. He listened as the council members brought forth their concerns and request for more relief funds. Through the nearly hour-long discussion, he merely listened passively as he smoked his pipe, looking for all the world like an old man who had nothing better to do than be there. Finally, the proceedings drew to a close, ending with the head of the hospital requesting extra helping hands in the form of any ninja who knew battlefield healing. They had all been run ragged and most couldn't even summon up the chakra to close a paper cut anymore. Once they were all done, the daimyo leaned forward slightly, drawing the attention of everyone present, and spoke in a casual tone that disarmed all but the similarly cunning Hokage and a few of the ninja present. The damages sustained sadden me, but I am confident that Konoha can bounce back from such a tragedy. Still, this old man's memory might be faulty, but don't such enemy actions usually result in more losses? Seeing the young lad before them verbally stumble as he tried to provide a response to his lord's unspoken question, Danzo took the opening presented to shift the discussion into a direction he wanted. Indeed, Daimyo-sama, and there are sayings circulating about why that was not the case. Abruptly, the air in the room thickened with tension as Danzo broached the topic that everyone wanted to discuss, yet no one wanted to bring up. Some of the people who had let down their guard earlier as it seemed that the meeting would proceed as normal were currently cursing themselves for allowing themselves to be caught flat-footed. Still playing the absent-minded old ruler that he was not, the fire daimyo let loose an awe sound of realization, and spoke up innocently. Yes, I hear that it was all from the effort of one lone genin, one namikaze Naruto. As some of the people present flinched at the name, those who had not yet caught on were beginning to realize that the seemingly doting old ruler before them was up to something, and the faint feelings of dread began to creep into their minds. Casting his gaze on his teammate, Danzo found Sarutobi nonchalantly refilling his tobacco pipe, acting as though it were vital to all of existence that his pipe be refilled in the next moment. Suddenly realizing that the lateness of the Hokage and daimyo to the meeting had probably been planned, providing them with some time to plot together, thus putting him at a disadvantage, he settled back in his seat, determined to observe what was about to happen next, and to ensure that he didn't fall for whatever scheme the two crafty rulers had cooked up. A particularly brave councilman spoke up in meek tones, still unwilling to entertain the possibility of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's parentage and the changes that such truth would cause to the status quo. Ah, daimyo-sama, don't you mean Uzumaki Naruto? Blinking at the man as though he were a particularly interesting insect that persisted in clinging to his shoe, he turned to his fellow ruler and asked. Ho, am I wrong in my assumption, Sarutobi Dono? Did my eyes deceive me, or did the boy, in fact, look like my dear departed friend, Minato? The faces of those who had been particularly aggressive in the persecution of the child in question paled slightly as they were reminded of the close relationship that had existed between the daimyo and the Yondaime Hokage for the year that he had led their village. The daimyo had treated Minato like a favored nephew, allowing him certain privileges that had enabled Minato curtail the influence of the civilian portion of the council, limiting their interference in his village and allowing him to better lead it. Now, along with that reminder of their lord's fondness for the legendary ninja came the realization that, if it were proven that Naruto was the man's son, they might have to answer to the most powerful man in the land for their treatment of the boy. Ignoring the slightly panicked looks of some of those present, Sarutobi finally confirmed a vital piece of the mystery surrounding Naruto. No, your eyes are as sharp as ever, Tanaka Dono. He is in fact the son of the late Yondaime Hokage. The risk of assassination attempts forced us to conceal the truth of his identity from the general public. With the room reeling from the blatant confirmation of long-held suspicions, the daimyo continued, striking while the metal was still hot and giving those present no time to react to the sudden bomb the Hokage had just dropped. Understandable, and in light of that fact, I find that my decision becomes easier. Now with a twinkle in his eyes, the daimyo spoke with an almost cheerful finality in his tone. Well, Sarutobi my friend, you and I can both agree that you are not getting any younger, and that at this juncture, it might be best to choose a successor. I think that Minato's strapping young lad is a reasonable candidate. Silence followed his declaration for a heartbeat, before it was abruptly shattered by loud protests from most of those gathered, civilians and ninjas alike. Through the furious shouts of, "He's too young," "There are better candidates," and even, "Not that demon brat," which caused an unnoticed twitch in the sandame's right eye, the aging daimyo merely sat back and calmly observed the chaos caused by his words. Finally, Danzo's sharp voice sliced through the storm of protests, forcibly refocusing the attention of the furious council members on the matter at hand. I must admit, Daimyo-sama, that I agree with my fellow councilman that the boy is simply not ready to be considered for such a thing. Still, in all this excitement, I notice that my former teammate has yet to give his opinion. Pleased at shifting the attention to the old Hokage, Danzo subsided, waiting for Sarutobi's next move. Blowing out a stream of smoke, Hiruzen finally turned his eyes on the people waiting for his input, noticing Danzo's sharp gaze but not reacting to it. With an even tone, he spoke. Naruto-kun, without a doubt, is the embodiment of the will of fire, which is the heart of this great village. I have complete faith in his ability to be the greatest Hokage that this village has ever known, and I stand with you in the matter of my needing a successor. That said, I must agree with the objections to his age and lack of experience. He is simply not ready to be Godime Hokage. Faint muttering broke out amongst those who had been protesting the daimyo's words, many of them relieved that the Hokage would not be considering Naruto as a successor. Danzo, however, found himself uneasy even though he should feel pleased that Sarutobi seemed to be disagreeing with his assumed accomplice. As he noticed his old friend preparing to speak again, he listened, and learned the reason for his unease. While the others in the room were feeling relieved at Sarutobi's words, he spoke again, garnering their attention once more. As I said, he is simply not ready to be Godime Hokage, which is why he will be the Rokudime Hokage. Jaws dropped at that statement, but before their owners could begin a fresh round of protests, the Sandame continued. The delay will give him the time to grow up, mature, and learn about leading a village while catering to the needs of the people. Irritated at his teammates' slyness in nominating the boy for Rokudime, an action which the daimyo seemed to have expected, judging by his nodding head, Danzo moved on to the second part of his plan, appointing Upon as Godime Hokage, and only if he couldn't get himself chosen. Putting that matter aside, we are still in need of an immediate successor. Now, I have a few suggestions in mind, which I am sure you will all agree are. Smoothly interrupting him, Sarutobi said, "Oh, did I fail to mention? Forgive me, it must be the forgetfulness of old age, you see. We do already have a Godime Hokage, and if I am not mistaken, my successor should be arriving any moment now." Just as everyone had finally digested his words, and before anyone could react to that surprising tidbit, least of all, Danzo, who felt like strangling his faintly smug teammate, the doors swung open to reveal the figures of two of Konoha's legends. Striding forward, heels clacking against the floor, green robe fluttering behind her, and generous bust swinging side to side, Senju Tsunade cut an impressive figure as she came to a stop in the center of the council room, eyes fixed in a glare fit to strip paint off the walls. At her side, Jiraiya trailed in, bruises on his face showing his lack of success in keeping his perverted nature under wraps around the volatile woman. With a scowl planted on a face belonging to a woman decades younger, the slug princess locked her resentful gaze on the eyes of her placid teacher, terribly annoyed at being strong-armed into coming back to the place that had robbed her of everything she had ever loved. Fidgeting impatiently in place, Haruno Sakura called out once more. "Hurry up, Ino. I want to get there before any of the others. With an exasperated huff, Ino finally emerged from her family's flower shop, clutching 3 bouquets in her hands. Passing one of them to Sakura, she turned to start walking towards the hospital, making space for her pink-haired friend to walk beside her. Sakura threw a questioning look at the second bouquet in the blonde's hands and asked, Ino, why do you have 2? Ah, don't tell me, you're trying to impress Sasuke-kun, aren't you? Rolling her eyes at her friend's over-fixation with the broody Uchiha air, blatantly ignoring the fact that she had been just as bad days before, Ino responded. TCH, don't be daft, Sakura. One is for Sasuke-kun, and the other is for Naruto-kun. Blinking in surprise at that, Sakura suddenly felt guilty for forgetting that her second teammate was also in the hospital. Aiming a slightly sheepish look at her irritated friend, she continued walking towards the library, thinking about the happenings of the past few days. When the cage's box had exploded and the invasion begun, she had been frozen in fear, having just seen an unknown Konoha ninja die just before her eyes. In her state of fear, she had not noticed the veritable rain of weapons bearing down on her teammate, nor his surprising rejoinder, nor even the ninja sneaking up to separate her pink head from her body. It had been Ino's scream of fear that had caused her to turn and find the sword on its path to behead her. Having only enough time to flinch, Sakura paled in fear as she realized that she was about to die, when out of nowhere, there had been a buzz of sound and she had found herself looking into the slightly concerned eyes of her teammate. Shaking herself off, she had put together what had just happened, but before she could turn to thank the blonde, he was already off, tearing through the attacking ninja, leaving behind the gaping forms of his fellow genin. Moments after her brush with death, she had received orders from Kakashi-sensei to do what she could to help fight off the invasion attempt, placing Shikamaru in charge of the genin present and leaving them to their devices. After that, she had had no more time to think about anything other than another kunai, aim, release, providing long-distance support to the rest of the genin was about the only thing she could do at the time. When everything had finally settled, she had heard that Sasuke had been admitted into the hospital, but since she had been roped into helping the relief efforts, she had been unable to go visit him until this moment. Yet, as she walked beside her friend, she couldn't help but remember the genuine concern she had seen in her blonde teammate's sky-blue eyes. Wondering why he would bother to care about her when she knew that she had, and she was embarrassed to admit, been nothing but a bitch to him since they had become a team, she suddenly had a flashback to the mission at Wave. We are teammates, and inherent in that description is the understanding that during missions I watch your back and expect you to watch mine. Ah, so that was it then. Somehow, the belief that he had only cared because it was expected of him stung her fiercely, and she idly wondered how things might have turned out if she had actually taken the time to get to know him. Walking next to her pink-haired friend, Ino was oblivious to Sakura's suddenly downcast mood. She was occupied with her own thoughts. While she had been helping out in the hospital, she had managed to listen into various conversations amongst the older ninjas present. They had all talked about the same thing. And really, how could she blame them? She was one of the boys' classmates, and yet even she too had been blown away by his performance at the Chunin selection exams. Who would have thought that Naruto, would be able to do the things he did? It baffled the mind, and if she were honest, scared her a little bit. Here was a boy who was her own age that was capable of going head to head with Junin twice his age, and emerging victorious. She had picked up rumors of his actions at the walls, the academy, and even how some of his clones had provided emergency first aid to Konoha ninja who would have died otherwise. Still, no matter how juicy the gossip surrounding his actions during the invasion was, it paled in comparison to the rumors flying around about the possibility that he was their hero's son. She had been there when his face had been unmasked for the first time in 2 years, and even she, a child who had never met the Yondaime in person, had immediately noticed the eerie similarity between her age mate and one of the faces on the Hokage monument. A lot of people seemed to be convinced that he was indeed the Yondaime's son, yet at the same time, they all seemed to be afraid to accept it as the truth. If she didn't know any better, she say that they seemed like they had done something terribly wrong and very soon, they would pay for it. Now, as she made her way towards the hospital to visit the two hospitalized members of the Rookie Nine, she wondered if she could get something interesting out of her fellow blonde, not even dwelling on the fact that she was about to visit Sasuke. Besides, she thought to herself, Naruto is kind of a hottie too. The two girls, lost in their respective thoughts, walked into the hospital, oblivious to the reflective flash of a pair of lenses being adjusted somewhere in a darkened alley behind them. With a faint start, Uchiha Sasuke jerked out of unconsciousness to hear the faint murmur of voices just outside the door. His return to wakefulness left him disoriented and confused for a moment, memories vague and blurry, as he tried to recall how he had ended up in a hospital bed. Racking his mind, the last thing he could recall was charging at his sensei, newly learned, but not yet mastered, Chidori crackling merrily in his clenched hand, then nothing. Checking himself over, he found that he had no lingering soreness or aches anywhere, nor was he bandaged. With furrowed brows, he sat up in his bed, seconds before the door to his room swung open to reveal his two most persistent fangirls. Suppressing a grimace of irritation, Sasuke plastered on an indifferent look on his face as he prepared to find out what had happened in the time that he had been unconscious. Pinning the two girls with a look, he questioned them before they could start off with their usual irritating fussing and pestering. "Why am I in here?" Momentarily taken aback at being directly addressed by their main crush, the two girls faltered in their approach for an instant, before Sakura was able to pull herself together and respond. "Well, Kakashi-sensei said that you were injured at the beginning of the invasion." Now more confused, Sasuke queried. "What invasion?" Blinking in surprise at him, Ino wondered if his memory had been affected by the attack on his person. Shrugging off her thoughts on that matter, she began to detail what had happened, with Sakura occasionally adding in bits and pieces that she hadn't been aware of. Almost without conscious thought, she found herself slightly gushing about Naruto's part in repelling the invasion, completely ignorant of Sasuke's increasing fury and Sakura's mounting confusion. As soon as she finished, making sure to mention the rumors surrounding Naruto's parentage and whispers of a promotion beyond Chunin, she turned to Sasuke and waited for his reaction. Sasuke, for his part, was absolutely blank on the outside. So great was his rage that his features were unable to express it clearly, and so defaulted to a blank and expressionless visage. He could not seem to think beyond the knowledge that Naruto, of all people, had possessed such power without him knowing. It was incomprehensible that a no-name clanless orphan, regardless of the rumors surrounding his possible father, would be capable of such feats that he knew he could not even fathom doing. Who, he snarled in his mind, who thought him all these years? Why didn't they teach me? I'm the one who needs to grow stronger, to kill him. Why? His thoughts cycled within his mind, bolstering his anger to never-before-seen heights. So consumed was he by the furious storm of emotion that he was not aware when he turned to the two girls by his bedside and slowly said, "Leave." Something of his bottled-up feelings must have shown because, with none of her usual reluctance to leave him, Sakura promptly stood up to leave, somehow convincing herself that she was not fleeing. Ino trailed after her, pausing in the doorway to toss one last glance at the frozen form of the Uchiha heir, before she shut the door behind her. Now alone, Sasuke finally allowed himself to outwardly react to the situation. His teeth ground together in fury, his Sharingan activated and began to spin furiously, and color rose in his cheeks as his rage effortlessly shattered his usually calm Uchiha facade. His hands, hidden by the blanket pooled at his waist, clenched so tightly that his nail cut into his palm, leaving behind bloody red crescents in his pale skin. Hate, thick, oozing, cloying hatred burst forth from his heart, filling up his entire being until all that he knew, all that he could have ever known, all that he was hate. Hatred at Naruto for being strong when he could not. Hatred at Konoha for denying him the power he needed to fulfill his lifelong dream. Hatred at him for destroying everything that he had ever loved. Above all, hatred at himself for being weak. Suddenly, he lurched forward, right hand flying up to grab at the place where his left shoulder met his neck. It was only then that he became aware of the spreading marks on his body, all originating from the curse seal on his body. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to calm down and steadily pushed back the influence of the seal. When he had it back under control, he took in a deep breath and let it out. Abruptly, his mind flashed back to the second stage of the Chunin exams, when he had been under the influence of Orochimaru's seal, when he had been too strong for any of the other genin to contend with. No, he recalled, Naruto was able to stop me. With the thought of his teammate, he was plunged back into his thoughts on the recent invasion and how useless he had been in comparison to the academy dead last. Just as he was about to fully resume the vicious cycle of his destructive thoughts, the gentle clearing of a throat right beside his bed had him flinching and zeroing in on the figure suddenly standing there. He had just managed to take in the silver hair and glasses before the person spoke in an unassuming tone. Sasuke-kun, my master has a proposal for you. Seating on his specially crafted raised chair, the crafty old fox known as Onoki the fence-sitter pondered the documents placed before him. His spies had just brought word of the recent happenings in Konoha. He wasn't even focused on the opportunities that might exist as a result of the damages sustained by Konoha. No, he was instead gazing at a picture that brought tension to his jaw, and a hard glint to his eyes. Once he had heard news of another blonde-haired blue-eyed ninja capable of unbelievable high-speed movement, as well as summoning toads, he had contemplated the risks and benefits of attempting to assassinate the child before he got the chance to truly grow into his power. And wasn't that just a fearsome thought, that the child was capable of such feats at the young age of 13? Honestly, youngsters these days, trying to surpass their elders while still in diapers. He wondered what this new development would mean for his village. They had just barely finished recovering from the devastating blow dealt them by the Yondaime Hokage, not to mention the recent issue with one of their strongest ninja defecting to join some rogue group. His granddaughter had grown into a fine kunoichi, but even he had to admit that she would be no match for the rumored Namikaze heir. In truth, he estimated that they might be perhaps a dozen, at most, ninja in his village capable of matching the child, and he counted himself amongst them. There had even been rumors, a few years previous, of the identity of the new Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The lack of identifying traits on the blonde-haired child had weakened the integrity of such rumors, but if it were true, then he knew that they were in serious trouble. With a weary sigh, he finally placed his stamp of approval on the documents he had been staring at for the past hour. Name: Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto. Rank: S-Class, Engage with Caution. Skill: High skills in Taijutsu, Kenjutsu, Ninjutsu, Unknown talent with Genjutsu. Capable of cage-level speed and strength, and toad summoning. High proficiency in the use of the Raiden element. Note: rumored to be the son of the Yellow Flash. Bounty: 40 million Ryo dead or alive. As he called for his secretary to come and send his approval to the bounty station, he began making plans to return Iwa's absent Jinchurikis to the fold. They would need all the strength that they could muster in the coming months. The dark-skinned Cage considered the splintered remains of his desk while, to the side, his secretary shook her head in exasperation. He stood up and walked to his balcony overseeing his village, thoughts fixed on what he had just learned from one of his informants. He didn't even entertain the notion that Uzumaki was not that man's son. There was no doubt in his mind whatsoever. How could there be when the boy was a mini replica of the only man who had ever matched him in speed, while also wielding a high-speed jutsu so like his own Raiden no Yoroi. Yet, being a man who valued strength above all things, the main though on his mind at that moment was that he was somewhat eager to test the boy's mettle in battle, but that was for another time. He wondered what the repercussions of the recent events in Konoha would be. He had finally managed to fix most of the mistakes of his bloodline-obsessed predecessor and had dragged Kumogakure into the echelons of the major powers in the ninja world, and now, Konoha had to go and pull such a stunt. There was no doubt in his mind that the display of skill put on by the genin during the Chunin exams would see Konoha's reputation bolstered amongst the civilian clientele, leading to an increase in mission requests and revenue. He let loose a weary sigh. There was no helping it then. It was time to start resending Killer B, Darui, Team Samui, and Yugito on more visible high-profile missions. It wouldn't do for people to think that they didn't possess talented shinobi of their own. But first, he turned to Mabui and shouted, "Mabui, tell my foolish brother to meet me at my private training grounds." It was time to put B through the paces. A knock on the door announced the presence of yet another visitor, before the door opened to reveal the bored face of Nara Shikamaru and his companion, Akamichi Choji. Shikamaru paused for a second as he took in the forms of his fellow genin, noting that save for Sasuke and Naruto, the rest of the Konoha 12 were present in Lee's hospital room. With a mumbled troublesome, Shikamaru slouched into the room and placed his own get-well card on the bedside table, which was overflowing with well wishes and gifts. Apparently, Ino had been in the middle of sharing something, and she promptly got back to it once the customary greetings were over and done with. Shikamaru found himself unsurprised at the topic of the conversation. As I was saying, just when did Naruto-kun become so strong? I mean, wasn't it just yesterday that he was the dead last of our class and... A sudden sigh from Shikamaru cut her off, causing her to turn an annoyed, and expectant, gaze on the lazy Chunin. Wondering if the effort of explaining was worth it, Shikamaru let loose another sigh, causing Ino's face to tighten in further annoyance, before he explained. It's obvious that he was only the dead last because he wanted to be, no, because he didn't care enough not to be. Seeing the uncomprehending looks of his peers, he elaborated. Remember, Naruto used to skip a lot of classes, never even showing up for taijutsu or weapons practice. The academy only required that you attend a certain number of classes as well as pass your final exams to pass the year. So, he skipped out on almost everything, and that was why his grades were low enough to make him dead last. Obviously, from his performance during the Chunin exams, and even during the academy graduation, it's clear that he had not been idle in the 2 years he was skipping. The others, partly surprised by Shikamaru's words, and also by the fact that he spoke so much in one sitting, took a moment to digest the explanation. Lee, Neji and Tenten, neither of whom had had much contact with Naruto before, couldn't really draw their own conclusions on the matter. The three of them had just assumed that Naruto's skills had been a combination of inborn talent and having a legend like Kakashi as a teacher. Sakura's voice drew them out of their thoughts. Then why did he hide it? I mean, there's no way that he would have just let people think he was weak if he wasn't. Well, at least back then he wouldn't have. The last part, spoken at a lower volume, reminded the genins of Naruto's class that their classmate had changed somewhere along the way and they hadn't noticed. Shikamaru, for his part, was silent as he remembered days when teachers would send Naruto out of class minutes before teaching them something important, or when they would ignore the blonde boy's sometimes insightful questions. Privately, he wondered if Naruto had simply given up on the academy and done things his own way, and if that was the case, how much stronger would he have been if he had actually had a dedicated teacher? The gathered genin spoke some more about the recent happenings in the village, taking the time to congratulate Shikamaru on his promotion, to which he merely mumbled his usual catchphrase. They also talked about the rumors currently circulating the village as well as the presence of the renowned medic, Senju Tsunade, here, Lee was ecstatic at the possibility of his injuries sustained during the preliminaries finally being healed. Their discussion was just winding down when Lee suddenly perked up and exclaimed, "I have heard that my new youthful rival is trapped here like me. I'm sure it would bolster his flames of youth if we paid him a visit." After the few seconds spent parsing Lee's speech to understand him, most of the genin there expressed their consent at visiting Naruto. Lee was helped into the wheelchair by his bed, and together, they trooped down to Naruto's room, entering after knocking and a smooth voice telling them to enter. Naruto's blue gaze fixed on his fellow genin and he observed as they took in the obscene amount of flowers, balloons, and gifts surrounding his bed like an island in the sea. Apparently, it had only taken a few days for Naruto's fan club to start up and grow in size to rival that of Uchiha Sasuke. Blinking in amusement as he noticed that there was practically no space for them to stand close enough, he finally relented. Reaching out, he plucked a moderately sized wrapped package and, with his peers looking on in interest, took a very firm hold on his chakra and used the tiniest sliver of it to create a fine scalpel at the tip of his pointer finger. Using the chakra gathered there, he fluidly sketched out an elegant script of squiggly lines on the bottom of the gift, and focusing his mind on his purpose, he then activated the newly etched seal. With a shimmer of chakra, the numerous gifts surrounding his bedside vanished into the seal, leaving only the one present that he was holding. Even though he had been very delicate in his use of chakra, he still felt a slight twinge of his bruised chakra network complaining at his actions. Not reacting to the slightly wide eyes of the others in the room, he placed the single gift back on the table and motioned for them to make themselves comfortable. Shuffling forward, clearly curious at what they had just seen, the other Konoha genins arrayed themselves around Naruto's bed, with Sakura taking the single seat available. Surprisingly, it was not Ino who finally burst out in rapid-fire questions at Naruto's actions, it was Tenten. "Wait, just now, was that a storage seal? I use them a lot, and I didn't recognize it. Also, I noticed that there wasn't any smoke or sound when you sealed them. And how did you draw without ink? I've never heard of the method before." While the others were still reeling from Tenten's rapid-fire questions, Naruto found that he couldn't suppress the small smile that grew on his face, nor did he want to. However, as he moved to give her a few answers, vague as they may be, he suddenly noticed the distracted and slightly glazed look in the eyes of the budding weapons mistress, as well as the faint blush on her cheeks. Casting his eyes around revealed that she wasn't the only one whose eyes seemed unable to focus on his face, or to focus on anything besides his face. It took him only a moment to realize the cause of their distraction, and when he did, he only just managed to bite back a sigh. It had taken him a few decades to figure out some of the consequences of his transformation into the Eternal Sage. First of all, whenever he transferred into a new reality, and a new body, his essence would begin to influence his physical body, changing it to more easily fit his soul. The end result was that all scars on his body vanished, leaving behind flawless golden tanned skin. His eyes almost always ended up blue, even if he had been born to different parents. It was not always the case that his hair was golden, but then those were often exceptions caused by bloodlines. When all was said and done, even at the age of 13, Naruto was already a breathtaking sight, and appearing shirtless and without his face mask just made his allure more noticeable. Secondly, his chakra had not remained unchanged after absorbing an entire world's worth of natural energy. That energy, being the energy of life itself, had a quality that always seemed to draw in living things, causing them to feel relaxed and blissed out in the presence of concentrated doses of natural energy. Though Naruto was not currently molding sage chakra, his body's own normal chakra had been warped by the presence of a sage's soul, causing its nature to take on some of the relaxing aspects of the energy of life. In fact, he had been curious a few millennia previous and had set out to test just how potent his chakra could be. The results had been surprising. He had discovered that, at full blast, his chakra was able to negate the terror-inducing killing intent of the 9 Biju, combined. In the presence of his chakra, plants seemed greener and the air seemed fresher, life, all round, just seemed more vibrant. The combination of the two above-mentioned factors was currently wreaking havoc on the attention spans of the Konoha genin present. It was not usually a problem since his custom limiter seal was usually kept on level 7, limiting his chakra output as well as its passive effect on the people around him. Now, his seal was on a constant level 6 and, until his chakra network healed completely from the bruising it had received owing to his actions during the invasion, he would be unable to seal off level 6. At that level, his aura was more noticeable owing to more of his chakra being on hand, and thus able to radiate more of the effects of his chakra. Still, the situation was not completely hopeless. He mentally grasped his chakra and began to wind it tightly about his person, ignoring the twinges that came from manipulating his chakra network while it was still healing. Slowly, the effect of his chakra aura reduced until the genin present were able to shake off his allure. The moment he saw that he had their attention, he didn't wait for anyone to ask what had just happened, and instead began to answer Tenten's questions. Yes, it was a storage seal, a customized one, hence the lack of smoke or sound. The technique I used to draw it is a clan secret, however, sorry. Tenten, having finally gotten a hold of herself, was stumped at the last bit. With furrowed brows, she inquired further. What clan? I thought you were an orphan. Naruto let loose a noncommittal hum and, noticing that he had the full attention of everyone present, he replied. My clan, the Uzumaki clan of Uzushiogakure. Shikamaru shifted at that, drawing the notice of the others in the room. With sharpened eyes, he queried. Wait, you're really from that clan? I thought your last name was just chosen because you were an orphan. Naruto had a small smile on his face as he shook his head to negate Shikamaru's last statement. Sakura piped up with a question of her own. I remember reading about the clan, but it was only a small mention. She turned expectant eyes on her blonde teammate, unconsciously ignoring their somewhat strained relationship in favor of new knowledge. With a shrug, Naruto explained a little bit of Uzushiogakure's history, their proficiency with Fuinjutsu as well as their subsequent destruction for said skills. With an interested look in her eyes, Ino leaned forward and asked. Is that where you learnt your stuff, from clan scrolls? Apparently that was a question everyone was interested in because the others shifted in attention. Naruto spared a scant second to consider how to respond before finally settling on. You could say that. I came across some knowledge of my clan about 3 years ago. Shikamaru then spoke, with the satisfied air of someone who had just solved an intriguing puzzle. 3 years ago, that time you missed about a month of classes towards the end of the year. Then, that must be why you began to skip, you were using the time to train in clan stuff. The rest leaned in to take in Naruto's response to that theory. He merely responded with an enigmatic smile that had most of them huffing in exasperation. Still, most of them were convinced that Shikamaru was right in his conclusions. Lee then chose that moment to burst out. Naruto-kun, your flames of youth were burning brightly during the Chunin exams. I hope that Tsunade-sama can heal me soon so that I may spar with you and encourage our flames to new heights. Naruto expressed his consent to the future spar while the others also exclaimed over his performance during the exams, with most of them offering him congratulations since they fully believed that he would be promoted as well. They all fell silent however when they noticed Naruto's gaze on Neji. Neji, noticing the attention of his fellow genin, looked back stoically at the teen who had effortlessly defeated him in combat. He noticed Naruto's eyes flick to his left and, glancing over for a second, he saw that Naruto had looked at his cousin. Once he turned back to the piercing blue eyes, he found Naruto's face fixed in a questioning look with an eyebrow raised. While everyone else held their breath at the mounting tension, Neji considered the talk he had had with his uncle after he had lost his match. Then, with his features softening a little, he inclined his head towards Naruto, who returned the gesture with one of his own. The two teens then had to fight back snickers at the audible sighs of relief spreading throughout the room. They had reached an understanding, and now, Neji was no longer blinded by his hatred. The 11 members of the Konoha 12 then spent some more time just talking amongst themselves. The others slowly got introduced to the Naruto they had never taken the time to know, and Naruto, well, he reconnected with the teens that had more often than not become best friends and more in other lives. By the time the teens left Naruto's room, not everything was dealt with, but bridges had been mended enough that everyone was comfortable with each other, and there had even been an agreement to meet up at a grill place for lunch sometime later. Naruto's face held a soft smile as the last of his mates finally left his room. Now that he was alone, he set about fully checking up on the status of his body. Apparently, he had made a slight miscalculation in the design of his custom limiter seal, as evidenced by the present state of his chakra network. He had spent about 2 years on a constant level 7, and so, when he had unsealed to level 6 and then flung around high-powered jutsu like candy on Halloween, he had strained his chakra pathways before they could acclimatize to the new level. It wasn't too bad though, since this was the first time he was ever using said seal. It was actually pretty good for a first attempt. All that he would need to do would be to tweak the seal a little bit to speed up the rate at which his body adjusted to new levels. Normally, his advanced regeneration would have kicked in by now, but it was a chakra-based ability, and so, given that his ability to use chakra was slightly dampened, he was healing at a slower rate than normal, still faster than the average ninja though. At his current level, using chakra caused a negligible ache in his body, as long as he wasn't doing anything extreme like summoning. Also, as he was now, level 6 in all, there were only a handful of people alive who could sneak into Konoha, harm him, and then make their way out before being intercepted. Pleased with the pace that his body was mending and with the general state of things, he made to relax back in his bed when he suddenly tensed up, his piercing blue eyes flashing to the darkest corner of his room, just in time to see a figure materialize out of thin air. The newcomer was dressed in black robes with red clouds and an orange swirly mask with one eye hole in it. Jiraiya's hand was inches from the door handle when he felt the spike of foreign, and hostile, chakra in his godson's room. Before the surge had fully vanished, the door was already halfway through the wall on the other side of the room, lodged there by Jiraiya's mighty shove. He only took a heartbeat to understand what his eyes were seeing: orange mask, single Sharingan eye, and above all, a black cloak with red clouds, Akatsuki, before he moved, hurtling across the floor towards the masked intruder with his right hand outstretched and clutching a swirling ball of condensed chakra. In the doorway, Sarutobi donned the persona of the Kami no Shinobi as he prepared to move into any opening that Jiraiya created, while behind him, Kakashi and Tsunade shifted as well in preparation for a supporting attack. All plans were summarily tossed out the window as Jiraiya phased through the stranger, clutched Rasengan and all, and obliterated the wall behind him. The destruction and use of chakra drew the attention of nearby Anbu, and with a flutter of black, there was a 4-man squad arrayed behind the 3 ninjas in the door, as well as occupying some of the space previously taken by the now non-existent wall surrounding the doorway. As Sarutobi motioned for them to halt their attacks, worried about collateral damage if their attacks passed through the intruder, he watched on as Jiraiya attempted to regain his footing from the surprise miss. A pale hand bearing a ring suddenly landed on the Toad Sanin's shoulder, and before anyone could react, the air around Jiraiya began to warp and twist into itself, seeking to suck the Sanin into places unknown. Jiraiya grimaced as he fought to escape the powerful pull, marshalling his chakra to no avail. Just as he was about to succumb to the assault, and with the surrounding Konoha ninja helpless to do anything, there were 3 flashes of golden yellow light, 2 so close together that they seemed to be one. Everyone blinked as they found Jiraiya suddenly seating next to the crouching form of Uzumaki Naruto. A single thought flashed through everyone's mind at the same time. Hiraishin. Before anyone could react to the re-emergence of such a legendary technique, Naruto spoke up. That attire, that technique, that chakra, without a doubt, you are the ninja who ripped the Kyuubi out of my mother and started its rampage in Konoha 13 years ago. Bodies shifted as the ninjas present released a burst of killing intent in a knee-jerk reaction to Naruto's statement. With the danger level of their foe just increased, they all focused as one on the enemy, now determined more than ever to bring him down. The masked man responded to Naruto's words, speaking in an even tone. I see, you know of what happened that night. How unexpected. As people glanced at him in expectation of his response, Naruto merely locked gazes with the stranger's lone eye and replied, all the while ignoring the startled gasps that sounded as people caught sight of his suddenly red and black slitted eyes. No matter how you try, you can't hide that kind of foul chakra from the Kyuubi. Eyes widened as those who heard him stiffened in surprise at having not sensed him accessing the Kyuubi's chakra. It spoke of a level of control that was frankly alarming. The masked man contemplated the blonde-haired kid before him. After hearing of the boy's performance during the Chunin exams, and the subsequent invasion, he had elected to look in on the brat, intending to find out if the boy would be a threat to his plans. His first inkling that something was wrong was when the boy noticed him as soon as he had begun to warp into his room. Next had been the fact that the boy had fearlessly met his eyes and all his attempts to put a genjutsu on him had failed. The illusions just seemed to be sliding off him like water off a duck. Next had been his command of the Hiraishin, displaying a proficiency with the jutsu that rivaled that of his own father. Now the boy was speaking of things he wasn't supposed to know, hinting at a cordial enough relationship with the Kyuubi sealed in him as well as an astonishing command of the Biju's chakra. He silently watched the other Konoha ninja present shift in their places as the various bombs were dropped one after the other. Finally, his red and black gaze alighted on a silver-haired masked face and his eyes flashed with hidden malice as his thoughts were flung on another tangent. He knew that something in him had broken irreparably as he had laid in the dark, waiting to die, trapped under tons of rock, and all alone. He was also aware that his master's meddling in his psyche had damaged him further. All the twisted words and, he only suspected, the genjutsu-backed commands that had been given to him. He knew these things, and yet he could not find it in himself to care. He would see to the fulfillment of all their plans, even if he had to take care of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki years ahead of schedule. Nothing would keep him from seeing her again. Naruto's now blue gaze remained on the mask-wearing stranger, even as he felt Jiraiya retake his feet next to him. He remained in position, waiting for a signal, and as soon as he got it, he was off. The watchers tensed as Naruto and the masked man suddenly moved in sync, racing towards each other. As they moved to intercept, a subtle, Anbu, hand signal from Naruto had them reluctantly staying their position. A few feet away from the quickly approaching blonde, the masked man's cursed eye noticed a twitch in the teen's right hand, effortlessly tracking the tri-pronged kunai that was suddenly flying towards his head. As the blade sunk into his head, and began to phase through, he spared a moment for one thought. Like father like son, he brought his right hand up to grasp Naruto's chest to warp him away, not even stumbling when his fingers only just brushed him before he vanished in a flash of golden yellow light. As he sensed the sudden presence of the child above him, his eye flashed in triumph as his left hand, which had been raised during his approach, brushed against Naruto's arm. He watched as the eyes of the surrounding ninja widened in dawning horror, relishing in their distress as he countered the move that had felled him 13 years ago. Before he could celebrate, however, his eye suddenly picked up on a second tri-pronged kunai. It was falling right past his face. He only had time to spare one thought. Damn, again. The cloaked intruder was suddenly propelled into what remained of the wall Jiraiya had destroyed by the force of the Rasengan thrust into his gut. Bits of his red and black cloak floated to the floor, as well as some blood and tissue. Once the room cleared, the people watching took in the damage wrought to the stranger, even as they all prepared to move in and finish taking him down. However, since all but one had been focused on his body, they all missed something vital. Their heads all snapped to the door at the sound of a choked-off breath, and they turned to find Hatake Kakashi, headband raised to reveal his spinning Sharingan eye, which was wide with stunned disbelief and something akin to horror. His whispered word, which still penetrated the silence, had them all flinching back to the intruder, allowing them to take in the entire scene. Naruto was standing in the center of the room, where he had met the intruder and outsmarted him. In his right hand, he clutched the two tri-pronged kunai he had teleported to. In his left, he held onto the orange mask he had ripped off. Against the wall, the formerly masked stranger felt the wind on his face, causing him to snap his gaze up into the wide eyes of the ninjas present, Kakashi's word a whisper on the wind. Obito. A few notes, if I might have some of your time. First of all, allow me to address the delay in posting a new chapter. I had been asked a question which caused me to pause and contemplate where I wanted to go with this story. It had taken me some time to realize that I was going about it all wrong. I didn't start this story with the intention of writing a deep plot with so many twists and turns and hidden secrets. No, I merely had a scene in my head of Naruto ripping off the Hyuga Kaden, and the rest is history. If authors are allowed to write hundreds of thousands of words worth of the protagonist just sleeping his way through everything that moves, and some things that don't, I think I am perfectly allowed to write a story where he is a cool guy who kicks ass and takes names, all the while casually reading a book. If I want a serious FIC, I have my Bleach story for that. This is just a project in self-amusement, and I am glad that others are able to enjoy the story as well. Okay. With that done, the next matter is that this story is very close to its conclusion. I know, I had mentioned the intention to write the Shippuden arc after this, but I considered, meh. Don't worry, I'm not going to make some half-arsed ending and slap a complete sticker on it. I will bring the story to a reasonable stopping point. But, I want to break out of this story and explore some more with his character. I even already have the opening chapters for 4 other short, maybe 30,000 words, Naruto stories involving our beloved eternal sage, and here's a sneak peek of one, just a few sentences though, we wouldn't want to give anything away. Sarutobi and Minato spun to face the door as it was flung open by a flustered Chunin, who promptly blurted out. Hokage-sama, there's a blonde stranger being held at the hospital. He came in with the body of Uchiha Obito, he's alive. Sarutobi only just felt the hand suddenly placed on his shoulder before his office vanished in a flash of yellow light. Rushing into the hospital room, noting the presence of 2 guards outside, the 2 ninjas were just in time to hear a smooth voice respond. Naruto, my name is Naruto. They took in the blonde-haired blue-eyed stranger whose face was covered with a face mask much like Kakashi's. But that's not important right now, Minato thought, he brought my kid back home.